All right, welcome to the March 16th joint meeting of the Environmental Board and the Park Board. I'm Jamie Finch, and I'll be chair of the Environmental Board, and I think sort of the master of ceremonies for both, I guess, today. Due to the hybrid nature of the meeting, we will have some members attending in person and others by computer or phone. For all those attending remotely, please obviously state your name before speaking and indicate your desire to chat by raising your hand. We'll try to do our best between Stacy and myself to track those hand raises. For those that are in person, what we do in the Environmental Board to indicate desire to speak is just to flip our name tags over like this. So as long as everyone's comfortable with that, that is the protocol we usually have here. So yeah, I think otherwise, I think from there we can probably get into attendance. So Stacy, if you want to take us first.
Great. Tom Anderson. Nancy Davidson. Here. Jamie Finch.
Here.
Rishi Hazara has an excused absence. Dan Hintz.
Here.
Laura Lebeco was going to join us virtually. Doesn't look like she's on yet, but I'll keep an eye out. Ashwin Manoharan. Don McWilliams.
Here.
Ann Newcomb.
Here.
And Janet Wall. And Sophie's going to call roll for Park Board.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Zach Sabluski, our chair, has an excused absence, so I'm going to do roll call in his stead. So Zach is excused. Marlene Waxy. Chris Kovac.
Here.
Andrew Eloquin has an excused absence. David Liu also has an excused absence. Nicholas Lee, maybe going to join virtual. Don't see how there yet. Brenda Spears. Katie Bell.
Here.
Tim Motley. Danielle Gibbons.
Here.
Brad Book.
I'm here.
And Andrew Myers has an excused absence. Now I'll pass it back to Jamie.
All right, and Stacy, do you know if we have anyone signed, like any members of the public joining remotely?
I do not see any members of the public joining remotely. We do have 2 members in the room.
Yes, so if there are any members of the public that would like to make a public comment, we obviously value input from the public, and one request is any comments, please do try to keep them to about 5 minutes. And I know, Connie, you may want to make a comment first?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, Dave's here.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I know. Did you see the map and the presentation? Anyway, never mind. I'll get there. Okay, my name's Connie Marsh. Obviously, I live on Squawk, and I have spent the last month looking at Sammamish Cove Park. So I am going to talk about Sammamish Cove Park today, which you all almost never talk about Sammamish Cove Park, but it is in the map for your presentation today. So this is both Park Board and Environmental Board, because this is a park that hits the shoreline of Lake Sammamish and has just been delineated as basically entirely wetland and wetland buffer. And Save Lake Sammamish has filed an appeal for the private project putting a pipe through your Sammamish Cove Park. I think I've sent you emails on this before. They simply could not get any information showing that someone studied whether this pipe could be avoided. And so that's the first step, right? Is you're trying not to impact your parks, you're trying not to impact your wetlands and the lake. And so it's a must-do step to try to make the city know that it actually has to be aware of these things. Now, more interesting than that, though that is fascinating. Then I watched a meeting that showed the Pinch Point Westlake Sammamish Parkway, which is the road that goes in front of Sammamish Cove Park, is showing an alignment to with a variety of choices to the public that don't try to avoid the wetlands and the park. They just say minimize. And you know, that isn't where you begin. You begin with avoiding, and so they're presenting to the public choices that will automatically de facto impact the wetlands. And like, as usual, that just lights my hair on fire, nothing new. And so then we also have a deed restriction of some sort in some process that we don't know how that's coming along. But this alignment of the road also goes actively into the park itself, even outside of the right-of-way in some of its alignments. During the conversation at this meeting, it was, well, people want to get from South Cove to the state park. So there was some conversation of why can't we dip down into the park and use the park as the road is being redone, or in the interim to at least get us to the state park so we don't feel like we're gonna die when we're going by the side of the road. Which is, you guys don't discuss Sammamish Cove Park because it's never really been planned. So I don't know, good idea, bad idea. You have some illegal trails in there right now that the city itself built, and I don't know what to do with those now. Even better, this new road is combining with the Schneider Creek project by the Washington State Department of Transportation, which is planning a Schneider Creek and another creek to go right through Sammamish Cove Park. So, interestingly, this is going to raise the road by 6 feet, making the interface with Sammamish Cove Park a very tall retaining wall. So they've decided to put the pedestrian pathway on the side where you have to throw yourself over the edge of the street to get away from the car, as compared to being impaled next to the new WashDOT retaining wall. I don't know if that's rational. I can't decide. I do know that both the Parks Board and the Environmental Board, in the concept of what processes should projects in general go through, this is the Environmental Board, and how should they be presented to the public to maintain our environmental quality? Because you guys are project specific, this is just an example. Now the Park Board, this is your Friplet Park. It hasn't been designed. No one's talking about it. Somebody's got to say something, otherwise this park is just gonna be like death by 1,000 cuts from every which way. So I think you need to plan the park. And hopefully your director will have an update on the deed restrictions today. That would be awesome. I'm probably over 5 minutes, but it's a long, involved story. Oh, wait, and it's in the presentation tonight as a, I know you didn't know that, right? As a channel migration zone off of the lake, which I didn't know the lake would get that. So the other discussion would be, even in an unlimited water body like Lake Sammamish is, wow, are we really gonna, anyway, there you go.
David Kapler, I guess I'm on board as well, Trails Club, and we are an amazing city in that we have a state park within our corporate limits, and we adjoin a second state park. And I don't think there's many cities in the country that share 2 state parks. And we, in the state park, like Sammamish State Park, there's an effort, they got a significant grant to do American with Disabilities Act accessible trails. And in the state park, it's pretty complicated with all the wetlands and all. Fortunately, grade's not much of an issue. The biggest grades are getting from ground level up onto a boardwalk. But I'm hoping that there's a little more interface between the city and the state on this effort. Here's somebody that's familiar with it. We're talking about a bridge over the creek, kind of between the lake and Costco, basically in that area. Significant trails will have to be in some wetland areas for boardwalks. We're really working hard trying to keep out of the wetlands as much as possible. But because of the accessibility this trail requires, it gets more complicated on that. Just one more. This city is amazing. We've got huge county park on Grand Ridge, the biggest county park, 3,000 acres adjoin us on our west side. We've got two state parks, and we have the State Department of Natural Resources property that adjoin ours. And then we also have a whole bunch of King County and other places that join us. So we've got tremendous opportunities here, and we've taken advantage of them over the decades. But we've got to keep doing it. And these two boards are exactly the two groups that can keep that going in the right direction. Thank you.
Nancy?
I just have a follow-up since Jeff happens to be here. I appreciate that. Jeff, if the state parks is doing trail work, do they have to go through permitting for the city? And I know you may not know the
Yeah, I
answer to
think
that.
that's, I believe they do, yes, we certainly do, so, yeah.
So they will have to get permits for any of this work and work with through, and depending upon their timing, may have to be subject to the new Title 18, depending upon when that gets approved.
Yeah, Title 18 is for public projects and private projects, yes, so.
I just wanted some clarification on that. Thank you.
Nancy? All right, I think that closes out public comment. So I think with that, we will move into our agenda items, with the first one being flood hazard management plan and flood hazard mapping studies. I think Alan might be introducing the King County team.
Yes, hi, everyone. Good evening, board members. My name is Alan Quinn, a senior engineer with the City of Issaquah. And the city's been working with King County Rivers, is it Rivers Division? I hope I got that right. For the last, year and a half at least, coordinating a map update of the FEMA floodplain along Issaquah Creek. So it's a huge effort to update that map. It's many decades old, which the county is going to go into all that, I'm sure, in the presentation. But I just wanted to introduce the team from the county. And so we have Judy Radloff and Tracy Windjam. I would pronounce those last names correctly. And I don't think Chris is here. Is that right? I don't see it. Chris Brummer. I'm not sure if he's there or not. But anyhow, that's the team that the city's been working with for the last, like I said, at least a year, if not longer. So I guess I'll let Judy take over from here. Does that make sense? Or Tracy, whoever. Yeah.
Thanks, Alan.
So I'll get started. I'm Chris Bertolato. I work with the King County River and Floodplain Management Team, so I'm one of apparently many Chris's in that section. Happy to be here today. So I'm here mostly to talk about, entirely to talk about the King County Flood Hazard Management Plan. You can go to the next one. And I've got some notes so I don't forget anything. I'm going to talk at a very high level about flood risks and flood hazards in King County. I do want to talk to you about why this update of a plan matters to you, to people in Issaquah and around Issaquah. I also want to talk about how the plan really means new opportunities and what we see coming and how we're hoping to gather ideas from the community and from different interested parties. So these are photos from Issaquah, and these are from floods in 2009 and 2020. Clearly, I'm going to be talking about flooding, and it's very possible that many of you have lived through, experienced flooding on your own property. You've dealt with damages on your property. So I'm just going to talk at this high level to make sure we all have the same amount of information, this baseline of info. And I'm also going to probably mostly talk about the negative impacts of flooding. Because that's when someone has water approaching their home, wherever it's coming from, that's really what you're thinking about are the negative impacts. I do want to say that flooding is a natural part of the landscape. So this is a part of how water works in King County and throughout Western Washington. We don't expect flooding to really ever go away. We don't try and do that in the flood plan. And there are some positive impacts. One being that it's great for fish and wildlife habitat. It's also great to bring new soils, really rich soils into farmland throughout the King County kind of farming valleys. But I am not going to focus on that. Just wanted to kind of give that background. So flooding is King County's most common natural hazard. Since 1990, there have been 13 presidentially declared flood hazards or disasters in King County. And that's an average about 1 every 2.5 years that actually rises to that level. So there are dozens and dozens of floods that have happened that have not risen to that level. Next slide.
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jeff Watling, just really quick note on that last frame that the reference to the flood in 2009, that was actually a 2019 event.
This one?
The Confluence Park Bridge wasn't there
Okay,
in
thank you.
2009. So
I'll
just,
make that correction. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm still kind of gathering
all good.
images,
It's all
so I
good.
appreciate
It's all
that
good.
help.
Chris, we do have, how would you like to handle questions throughout the presentation?
How about, I don't have a lot of slides, so how about I go through them, break down your comments, if you're remote, like put them in chat, however you wanna do it, and then maybe I'll take a few, and then there's a natural progression to Judy and Tracy's presentation, and so we're hoping, I didn't say this, we're hoping to mostly have time for conversation. We're gonna present maybe 15 minutes each, 15 to 20 minutes each at most, and really allow the rest of the time that we have for conversation. Does that work for everyone? Okay, and if there's something that I'm not being clear on though, if I'm really confusing you, do ask for clarification in that moment. I'm totally good with that.
Does sound like there's a quick comment.
I just wanted to make another comment on that slide that Jeff just pointed out, and that's Confluence Park. It was actually designed to do exactly what it's doing there. And so
Yes.
for people who might not know that part of the park was designed to flood intentionally to take some of the pressure off other areas.
Absolutely, yeah, and so we'll talk a bit about like what a flood hazard area is, where flooding is prone to happen, and how that's different from actually flood risk, because maybe there's no risk to the situation whatsoever. So we can go to the next one. So let's see. So I wanted to just mention, clearly people live in flood-prone areas. We have, I think the statistics are about 57,000 people in King County that are in high-risk flood-prone areas. That's probably a low number. We also have billions of dollars of income that are generated within these areas, as well as billions of dollars of infrastructure that allow people to get around. They, move utilities, sewage. There's all types of underground and above-ground items. So what happens when a flood happens, it's certainly very personal and what someone is dealing with in that moment, but it also has regional implications. There are damages that can happen from property and infrastructure, as you can see. And the impacts aren't just, we tend to think of homeowners and the impacts to homeowners, but it also affects people who rent property, people who are unhoused, business owners, so it doesn't really discriminate. The bridges can be washed out, and I think probably many of you have seen that, and that actually interrupts the ability for emergency responders to get to where they need to go in these times of disaster. And once the floods recede, so there's like that impact that's happening now, but once floods recede, there's also the damage that needs to be repaired, including damage to levees and revetments and facilities that help to protect or reduce the risk for future floods. Next one. So, as I said, this is pretty high level, and within 2 slides, I kind of gave you a very generic overview of flooding. But there's also this other issue, which is that the landscape simply changes naturally. So you have erosion that will happen along a river. I'm sure that you've seen that on Tibbetts and Issaquah Creek and all the channels that are not like totally confined, and we want to keep it exactly the place that they're in. This is a picture of the Told River. Since I typically work up in the Snoqualmie Valley, and it just shows how new channels can form gradually. They can happen very quickly, and I know Judy's going to talk about that quite a lot more. There are also types of different sources of flooding. So we often in our section talk about rivers. However, there are areas that can flood because they're along marine or lake shorelines. So when we are seeing changes with sea level rise, we expect kind of more severe, more frequent flooding over time. And we also have places that are just simply in low-lying areas. So you heard a little bit about wetlands. There's a lot of, if you click once more. So what changes are our uses, and this is where you get to the difference between hazards and risks. And so we've had more people over, 100 years come in and live in places that are flood prone. And I think our regulations limit development in those areas now, but it's not always been that case. And so this is where you get this fine dance of a natural process conflicting with a person's desire to protect their property. Next slide. So this is where the flood plan comes in, because it is that roadmap that will help King County navigate how do we manage this natural hazard, which we think is going to get worse or more severe over time, and the fact that it poses risks to personal property, safety, infrastructure, all these things that we want to try and minimize as much as possible. So the flood plan itself identifies flood hazards and risks through a lot of technical analysis and groundwork and looking at all different types of maps. It describes strategies, projects, and programs for mitigating that risk. And it defines King County policies, and it's specifically for unincorporated areas. Some municipalities do choose to adopt the flood plan. The King County Flood Control District for the 2006 and 2013 plan did adopt those plans as their guiding documents. So these, while the plan is really oriented towards unincorporated areas as we think about it more regionally across the county. Let's see, so in the plan, there might be a list of potential projects that are identified as well. Go to the next slide. I want to just talk about what our plans are right now. So there was a plan that was written in 2006. In 2013, it was updated. It wasn't a complete rewrite. And the goals for that plan, I'm not going to read them. They were very focused on flood risk reduction, reducing the impacts of doing that work, reducing the cost of doing that work. And this actually created there were some real big innovations that happened in these plans, but it also created some gaps that are pretty clear. If you go to the next slide. So this shows the current focus areas, that's what it says on the bottom, where the King County River and Floodplain Management really focuses their attention. And, and they're the large river systems, the Snoqualmie, the White, the Green, Southwark Sky, the Cedar as well. And I think for some period of time, Issaquah Creek probably did not have a lot of county attention, and that's changed pretty recently. But you notice like Sammamish River is not on here, Lake Sammamish is not identified, Vashon and Maury Island is completely not really getting a lot of attention for flood risk reduction through our flood plan. All of the coastal areas along King County where there's small tributaries that can kind of back up when there's, king tides and storm surges happening at the same time, and that can have real impacts on people. So there's some geographic gaps that are clear throughout, that we've seen over the last 20 years. Next. I'm not going to talk about all these because you're going to see this slide again. I'm just going to talk about the two that I think Tracy and Judy are not going to talk about. The flood plan gives us a toolbox, and we can kind of pull the right tools out based on the situation. And the two that I think Judy's not talking about are the flood warning services. So we do manage the flood warning center. We have flood apps. We have all types of ways to communicate an approaching flood. So how many people actually have a flood app or have anything downloaded? So there's all these great ways to stay informed for those that know about them. And I think the other one that you're not talking about it's that one, the infrastructure. We also work to protect public infrastructure. So we tend to prioritize our work in areas where this risk exists. We're not going to go into big national forests that are in King County and try and manage how the rivers or flooding happens because there's no risk. There's no one in harm's way. Next slide. So what does the next flood plan intend to do? So staff have been talking about the flood plan within King County for well over a couple of years. And we are very eager to fill some of the gaps that we've identified. So we've identified a few areas that I'll talk about. And what we're hearing from the community so far echoes that these are important. And so I'll share them, but it's not an inclusive list. So the next one. The first one is this idea of multi-benefit. That plan that we have now, very focused on flood risk reduction. So this project and on the toll pipeline protection project, it shows that we can do multi-benefit work because we're protecting a water pipeline to Seattle. We were dealing with farming drainage issues. There's fish and wildlife habitat that was created, flood risk reduction. But the flood plan as it stands right now it makes it is not embedded that all of our work should really think about multiple benefits that the community can gain from what we do. And so we really want to align with the flood control district's policy on multi-benefit and the need to do that work. The other thing is that the current flood plan has no content around climate change really, and that's a huge gap. We need to make sure that we're thinking about climate change, planning for it, and trying to be resilient in the face of whatever those changes will be. Next. So, there's been a lot of discussion. Staff have really felt that King County has not done an adequate job of engaging a fully diverse and representative population from King County and contributing to what these plans have looked like in the past. And so we really want to make sure that we are gathering input from people that we don't often talk to, and that typically are least resilient in the face of flooding, much more vulnerable. And so there's a strong equity focus in this, and that's part of why I'm here and doing a traveling kind of roadshow and reaching out in a lot of different ways. So that next one is that this is not inclusive, and we really need to hear from people about the gaps that you're seeing, the items that you believe need to be addressed in the next flood plan. Like I said, these seem to align with what we're hearing back from the community, but I'm sure there's local knowledge that you have that will be impactful. All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about flood resilience. So this is the other part that's not really reflected in the flood plan.
Hi, just a quick question. So the flood plan, is that something you're working on now? Is that something you plan on taking to the county council in the next
Yes.
year?
Yeah, so we are updating the flood plan right now. I have a schedule that I'll show you, but I'll just tell you right now that the King County Council will be receiving a draft of a plan that we're hoping will be informed by lots of community input towards the end of this year. And then they would be the ones to decide whether or not it should be adopted or changed. And it would be a product of King County, so it's not a product of the flood control district, and we're hoping that others like the district will adopt it as a guiding document as well. So the other part of what we are working towards is this idea of not just trying to reduce risk, but increasing resilience, the ability of people to recover fully, quickly, and completely from whatever flood-related impacts are associated with them. And what we find, throughout the world is that those folks who are the most vulnerable really do not recover as, say, like other people. So it depends, it's based on your race, your income, the resources you have to bridge the difficulties. And so the idea of building resilience really kind of could change the character of a flood plan. And again, this is still coming from staff. Next. I'm almost done. I'm not going to talk about these steps. It's not easy to figure out how do we build flood resilience. This is literally new language for us. But what is really important is that we need to hear from people to make sure that the perspectives of folks who live in a variety of places who are impacted by flooding are telling us what this plan needs to include. That's a key part of resilience, is making sure that we're not creating this in a little box. Thank you. This is the schedule. We've done all of this kind of pre-planning. We're kind of in this phase right now, and I would say in our community engagement phase, we're still at the point of trying to articulate the vision and the goals and the scope of the flood plan. So there's a lot of room to influence the outcomes. And eventually it will go to King County Council for them to make decisions. So this is, as I said, we're in the shared vision and goals strategy. We're asking people questions about their experiences of flooding. In terms of multi-benefits, what are the benefits? What is it about your community that you value? What are the things that we should be keeping in mind as we're creating risk reduction projects? And then what do you need to be prepared and able to recover from flooding? What are your ideas about how local government can serve you best to create this kind of shared vision? Thank you, Judy. And then in July or so, we expect that we'll see some emerging strategies and priorities emerging. And we'll also be asking for questions about those more specific ideas. And then there'll be an opportunity to provide comments on the draft plan. And we're also doing an EIS as a part of this. So there'll be a formal EIS when the draft is shared out. So this is my last slide, I believe. some of you, I know some of you, and I've worked in community engagement for a long time, and this whole idea that I come forward with is that there's not just one way to provide input. We do have an online survey, and it would be super convenient for us if everyone just put all their comments into that survey. But we also realized we need to give you the way that works best for you to comment. And so we are gonna be out and about at local events. I'm really looking for some ideas about how we can reach people in and around the Issaquah area. We're working in community partnerships, and we're really trying to target those community partnerships with groups that serve audiences, let's say an ethnic group that we don't currently have the trust of or familiarity with. So we're trying to engage with them to be educators and bring people into the fold that we haven't talked to. We will be doing some county-sponsored meetings, so stay tuned. And we have a survey, which people can certainly, fill out, and it will change in July when we have those emerging strategies. And you can also just call or email us. And the next slide has our contact info. So I do have some handouts that I can share. I put some business cards on the table, but that's all I want to share. Jason Wilkinson is the project manager, and I'm kind of on loan to the group, the policy team, to help them with the community engagement process. Did I miss anything, Judy?
I don't think so, Chris, but
All right.
I have a different perspective, so.
Okay. Yeah, we can take a few and then go to you. Okay. Are there any questions or comments? I'll pass these around.
Dan, please go ahead.
Hand these over. Dan Hintz with the Environmental Board. Chris, thank you. Yeah, I guess one suggestion, I kind of mentioned working with the Mountain Sun Greenway Trust. We have a decade or so working with landowners along the creek on knotweed control and riparian restoration. And, one of the big selling points, obviously we're trying to sell the salmon habitat for the work we're doing. That's what funds it, but is, concern around bank erosion and erosion control and talking about vegetation, how that helps that. So I'm just wondering if there could be a natural opportunity for whether it be the survey or some other connection. We're usually emailing 100, 150 landowners, usually in June or July, kind of with plans for the control work in the end of the summer. So in terms of people that live directly on the creek.
Absolutely.
Input,
Yeah,
I'd be happy to connect on that. So that's my comment. And, I guess this is a kind of a loaded question, but I think is something really important in the community here is, I was looking at the Tilt Pipeline project. How do we balance managing beaver habitat here and some of the flood concerns? I know that's something that's really tricky in this community, and I certainly don't seem to know what the straightforward answer is other than, relocation and removal. So I think that's something that I can speak for myself and probably some other people here that they care a lot about in terms of that balance of habitat for wildlife and all the benefits that beavers promote, and the need to convey water to the lake. So.
Go ahead.
I might be a little early with my question, so if I am, just tell me that you're gonna discuss this here in a bit. But I see a lot of work done out in the Snoqualmie Valley where you're buying back floodplains within counties, either it's leased land or you're buying land out there to put the floodplains back. But we're talking about Issaquah here today. So how is King County gonna help identify future floodplain areas in Issaquah? And is there gonna be a financial incentive per se for King County to help offset the purchase of those lands?
I think Judy and Tracy are gonna talk about the whole identifying the floodplain part, but I know that King County River and Floodplain Management section does work closely as a service provider to the King County Flood Control District to acquire properties. It's all by word of mouth. We don't advertise that, and there are funds available in different watersheds to do acquisition. And working in the Snoqualmie Valley, I work closely with the cities of North Bend and Snoqualmie, so our acquisitions can happen in incorporated areas, and that's not true for all King County departments. So I think in terms of acquisition, that's how I can answer the question. And in terms of mapping, I think that's a great segue. I'll just leave that for Judy's presentation.
Thank you.
As far as outreach for the community, I think it's really important to probably be talking also, not just with homeowners along the creek, but our downtown businesses along Front Street. Because the last couple of floods that we've had, I think, have impacted those businesses. So the Downtown Issaquah Association would be where I would kind of start with that if you haven't already reached out to them.
It was called the Downtown Business
Is it
Association.
Issaquah Association? I think that's probably the best place to start.
Thank you.
I have a question, Jamie Finch, Environmental Board, and it might be an impossible question, but I think one of the things that I would love to get at kind of the 40,000 foot view is how you guys think about priorities within a countywide floodplain, or flood plan, because I'm used to thinking at Issaquah level. I think that probably a lot of people are used to thinking at the very local level. And so for me, I would love to understand how you guys think about applying a county level plan to someone in Issaquah or another community, but I think specifically here, because I would just love to understand, it's a little bit like Dawn's question, but how you think that plan might impact the city, the Issaquah Creek, anything else would be super helpful to help understand just like the playing field that we're on.
I know that there's another project underway between King County and the city of Issaquah that it's a capital investment strategy. So it's a corridor plan. And so in the Snoqualmie Valley, we have 3 corridor planning processes that have been completed. When you do them, there's a lot of community input into that, a lot of analysis of what the risks and hazards are. And then what comes out of it is a capital investment strategy that helps to, it's like a list of sequenced and prioritized projects. And I believe that there's one going on within the city, within this area that I don't know as much about. But I think from a community perspective, I think that would be the place to really put a lot of attention into, because that is a guiding document that is used as King County is working with others. And it also is they are approved by the King County Flood Control District, which is really the main funder for all of our work.
Okay, and so that's probably one aspect of that. Is there any other kind of major areas that, if I was just the average citizen in Issaquah wanting to answer you, I'm like, what are my priorities? Things that would be relevant or the feedback that could be really helpful through it. And I know maybe it's anything, but I think what I'm trying to understand is just where like the plan might be informed by something happening in Issaquah. What type of things could be really helpful feedback?
You're asking about the flood plan that Chris was talking about?
Yeah, the flood plan,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
And it sounds like one aspect of it is,
Yeah.
or maybe a related thing is the investment plan you're working with Issaquah on, but I think I'm, still wanting
So
to
the
make sure I
flood plan.
understand the overall flood plan and like how someone in Issaquah might answer the question of what would be a priority, like what do I want to make sure that King County has in that flood plan?
And I think that's exactly the question, is what do you want to make sure King County is aware of as we're developing this plan? What do you think is important for us to bring forward in terms of like guiding strategies? And we have an online survey that has really targeted questions, but we've also had people email us with their issues of concern. One was all about communication being more simple and clear and more frequent. So you have an opportunity to decide what is the priority for this community to make sure it's reflected, to try and make sure it's reflected in the flood plan that is eventually adopted.
Thank you, Chris. I think Jeff, you were up next.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jamie. I just, in terms of public outreach opportunities, wanted to echo what Dan and Danielle said in terms of both residential and businesses, but also if you're looking for specific outreach opportunities for broader residents, happy to brainstorm further, but
Okay.
we've had a lot of success piggybacking on our farmer's market. Every Saturday, we get 3,000 people coming down to the Pickering Barn, and we've done some really effective outreach with some of our projects. So happy to partner with you on any of those events that we do as a city. And then just applaud seeing multiple benefit as being a real goal in this plan. I think specific to Issaquah, and so, when we look at the goals of Issaquah Creek, both for obviously flood protection, but also habitat, also recreational use, just having multiple benefit as a key goal is really good to see. I've had some experience. I spent 10 years in Kent, worked with the flood control district on some really big projects, some that are about to cut a ribbon on. that multiple benefit was hard for them to see for a while, but they finally got there. So I applaud seeing the value being placed on that.
Super, thank you.
Jeff, go to Nancy next, and then Laura, I do see your hand up, so we'll go to you after Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Davidson from the Environmental Board, and I guess, I mean, this is a very limited group you're speaking to here, and many of us don't live specifically on the creek, but when there is a flood, we see the consequences of it, particularly in Issaquah Creek. And as a former staff person seeing it up in Snoqualmie, I used to work for Snoqualmie. I could see very much what happens with floods. They did a much better job of communication. So in my opinion, you need to reach a broader audience than just talking to us. And I'd offer you a couple of suggestions to try and do that. I know the Downtown Association would be a great one, but also the mayor puts out a newsletter and you could put in a quick blurb about it, explain what you're trying to do, and then perhaps include like the survey. There's a City Insider newsletter that goes out, which is a different newsletter that goes out to a different group. But I'm sure even Jeff may have one for Parks. I think I've seen it once in a while, but getting the city's communication tools up so you reach the broader audiences than what you're seeing right here, I think would really help you. That's just my suggestion. I'm sure there's someone in communications at the city that can help you.
Thank
Not me.
Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. I think Laura, you're up next if you still have something to say.
Hi, Laura. Can you guys hear me all right? My remote
Yes.
life. I thank you for the presentation. This is super cohesive, like it feels really thoughtful. To your question about doing outreach, my family lives in that close to the creek, and a lot of those communities are HOA run. So I think finding ways to direct people to provide information to their HOAs and back again is really helpful, because everyone's sort of bound by, you know, the threat is also sort of, well, I can't do anything because my HOA has these regulations. I would love to see something that is a survey, but also provides some empowerment. So if people want to take action, they can, because there's such a helplessness, right? What will my government do to help me? But it's a marsh land. So, you know, providing ways that they could introduce rain gardens collectively to their neighborhood, and also introduce more vegetation, and directly expressing that that would reduce some risk to their neighborhood would be helpful. But I think that it's not quite clear how to use that for the HOA. So just providing some, you know, bi-directional input would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Anne, go ahead.
I'd like to support what, this is Anne. I'd like to support what Laura just said, and then also add, if you could use any permaculture practices. And the Issaquah Alps Trails Club would also be happy to support and, you know, publicize your survey.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other, I don't think we have any other online, so it seems like that is all for questions for Chris. So I think we can probably move on to the next portion of the presentation.
You need to share again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't bring the right mouse. Let's have to make minutes.
It's showing up on the WebEx. It's just not wanting to show on the screen.
Should I try a different share method, or?
Why don't you try one more? Otherwise I can try bringing it up. There's something weird about this connection. For folks on the phone, we just can't see the presentation in the room, but it looks like you all can see it. I'm getting a couple nods.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. They're all in here. Yeah, that happens a lot. So interesting. Are you trying a different?
Yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing, and then I'm gonna try sharing the screen, maybe, which is powerful. Nope.
No. Want me to try?
Sure.
It is sharing on WebEx. All right, one moment.
As Park Board knows, we've certainly talked as a team. Pre-pandemic, we were really good at all in person. During pandemic, we got really good at 100% virtual. Hybrid is the hardest of all.
Are you guys doing your hybrid meetings too?
Yeah. But it's.
And it also says not
While we're working on this, go ahead, real quick, we were, talking about people you might reach out to. I don't know if, we had a presentation from city staff that are working on rewriting sections of the city code. And they might need to be aware of this to make sure that the changes they're making will incorporate and align with what you're working on.
And so, we are working with some cities, some city staff are aware of this. We talked with them back in January, and I'm hoping that kind of communication network is happening within the city staff. Thank you.
Yeah, Evan Brumfield, he's on the call. We met with him today. He's in our group that we've been meeting with the city on about a monthly basis for, as Alan said, about a year and a half. So we've been talking to him more about our programs that Tracy and I are talking about rather than the flood plan, but I think he's on board now. So we'll reach out to him as well.
And the flood plan isn't actually, it doesn't cover incorporated areas either, so cities can choose what they want to align with. It's not a requirement that cities adopt all elements of the King County Flood Hazard Management Plan.
We're gonna try one more thing in just a moment, but unless we can flip laptops around so everyone can see the slides.
Yeah.
Tech troubleshooting.
I could do a really long introduction.
There you go.
My name.
Do you do song and dance too?
Pardon?
Do you do song and dance as well?
No, really not. Well, anyway, my name is Judy Bradlaugh. I'm a geologist, licensed engineering geologist in the state of Washington. I've been working about 25 or so years on geology in Western Washington, and I've been with the River and Floodplain Management section for about the last 5.5 years. And my partner today, Tracy Windham, the black square in the lower middle.
Who is visible
Who's visible,
online.
yeah, probably if you have a laptop. Tracy is also we're in what's called the Technical Services section in River and Floodplain Management. We serve countywide and we focus on programs and studies rather than capital projects. That's our mission. And when we get the slides up, you'll see that it's one part of one of those tools in the toolbox for floodplain management and flood hazard management. So Tracy and I today are going to be talking about flood hazard mapping on Issaquah Creek. And there's actually 2 mapping efforts that are underway. Tracy's doing one and I'm doing a second one.
Last attempt, 1 second.
Okay.
Come
Oh.
on. Come on.
Try.
Almost right.
We can turn, we can huddle around screens. It is showing up for those
on the WebEx.
Wow, there's this spread out laptops.
We can spread out laptops.
Spread my laptop out.
Sure. Sorry about that, folks.
We all have to stay.
I have it on my, if it was, if it's one is active, yeah. Someone can come sit up here and share my laptop.
Yep, there's a laptop up here, and I can move out of the way. Two people can sit here. You see ours?
I sent in, no, it's,
So 2 people could sit up there if you like.
oh, are you? The agenda doesn't have this part.
Do we always
I
do
guess
the slides?
I think you
There's another one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, you too?
It's definitely not good, but, you know.
Okay, so the intro page was just our names and our credentials. Tracy, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey folks, so my name is Tracy Winge. I'm an engineer in the tech services group in river and flood management. I'll be jumping in on a few slides here when we get to portions about the flood map study.
Great, thanks Tracy. So just a super quick agenda after this introduction. I'm going to talk about 2 flood hazard mapping studies that we're doing. The first one that I'll be talking about is the Channel Migration Zone map. That's a type of flood hazard. And then Tracy's going to talk about the flood map update. And we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So next slide, please. Let's see, yeah, you're going to have to advance.
Oh,
I'm advancing
Stacy.
now.
She's looking at it not on WebEx, I guess.
Yes.
We could, we could switch it, but let Chris do it if you want when she gets back. So what is integrated floodplain management? As Chris mentioned, integrated floodplain management is an evolution of just floodplain management that we did before. And flood hazard mapping is the first step in this in integrated floodplain management, where we identify hazards and we map them, and so that people know where they are. Integrated floodplain management includes multi-benefit approaches to capital project planning and design. These approaches incorporate the King County Flood Control District's commitment to environmental stewardship, equity and social justice, and environmental justice. Some examples of integrated floodplain management elements that provide environmental and community benefits are better quality fish habitat and aquatic habitat for a lot of creatures, parks with natural floodplain forests, open space that provides room for floodwaters and natural processes, such as your awesome Confluence Park. So flood hazard maps identify key locations where hazards exist and provide this important information to residents, managers, and regulators, and they help keep people and property safe, which is the next circled element of floodplain management. It helps direct development away from hazard areas. And we're very happy to partner with City of Issaquah staff, residents, and community groups in our flood risk reduction efforts, which is the collaboration piece of floodplain management. Next slide, please. So flood hazard mapping. This map shows in the green area where the flood hazard mapping is occurring for these 2 studies. The Channel Migration Zone map, as I said, is new, and that's only a portion of the green area. And the flood map update is, you'll see, is the entire green area. And we'll talk a little bit more about those when we get to the specific slides on the flood hazards studies. These studies will help inform work being done both by King County and the City of Issaquah to manage flood risk within the Issaquah Creek watershed. Next slide. So why are these studies needed? So these studies will provide important technical information that are needed to evaluate structural flood risk reduction measures for Issaquah Creek. As I said, these are studies, they're programmatic, so they give information that then is used for these structural measures to be evaluated and prioritized. And it became very apparent that they were needed when damage to public and private infrastructure along Issaquah Creek in 2020, when the flooding prompted the King County Flood Control District to direct King County Water and Land to develop a capital investment strategy
which is a report on potential options for comprehensive flood risk and flood risk reduction, facilities and strategies on Issaquah Creek. So that was the more specific plan that Chris was talking about. So channel migration zones, why is the study needed? It's a type of flood hazard. The Washington State Administrative Code that implements the Shoreline Management Act requires communities to map channel migration zones and regulate them. And there hasn't been one mapped yet for Issaquah Creek. So that'll be a new study. And then the existing flood maps, as you'll see very soon, are outdated and do not accurately represent current conditions. So the next slide shows illustrations of these and why these studies are needed. So on the left photograph is an example of active channel migration that was observed in 2020 and 2021. So channel migration is a natural process, and as Chris said, it's where streams move across their floodplains, and sometimes they move suddenly, jump the channel, occupy a new place entirely, and it can be quite surprising. And that process is called an avulsion, but more commonly, they just move gradually across the floodplain, and that's kind of what's happening in this photograph. So channel migration zones are areas that predict where we expect the channel to move in the future based on basically the geologic and topographic conditions and what we've observed about how the channel has moved in the past. So they're not perfect at predicting, but they are a predictive tool. So now Tracy's going to talk a little bit about the photograph on the right.
Thanks, Judy. As Judy mentioned in the previous slide, the current flood maps are outdated. Flood maps are supposed to show where flooding is expected during the year, or what we often call a 1% annual chance flood event, and oftentimes they also show even fringes flooding might be expected during a 500-year event. In this image on the right, the floodplain in the lighter blue, and inside of that is what we call the floodway. As mentioned, the existing mapping's outdated. It's over 20 years old, prepared using modeling approach data that may have changed over that time. And so this is just one really obvious example where the existing mapping doesn't even line up with the current location of the creek, right? Whether that's due to channel migration over that 20 years, or perhaps development, or a combination of those things. And these is where the mapping doesn't currently line. Were illustrated in flooding in 2020 and even perhaps in 2021, right? And so, there's been a lot of advances in data collection techniques, both aerial topographic data, aerial imagery, in years that allow us to prepare much more detailed maps, based to map the flooding on, additional 20-year rainfall data, even show some higher peak flows that could lead to changes in the predicted 100-year flow from what was used in the study in the past. Obviously, we all understand the advances in modeling and computer power that allow us to just model in much more detail than we have in the past. And, allows us basically to provide much more accurate and up-to-date flood information, which is critical, as Judy pointed out, for effective floodplain management. Thanks, Judy.
Is that it? Tracy, you were kind of breaking up. I'm going to pause for a moment and see if anybody needs a clarification. I do have his notes, and I might be able to fill in if anything was missed.
So is the assumption on this map that the blue line is the current path of the creek, and kind of Tracy was explaining how the floodway is well off of where it should be currently? Is that kind of what we're seeing here? The blue line's accurate in terms of location of the creek, but the floodplain, floodway are obviously not matching up how it should in some of these spots.
Yeah, so this is the 2021 aerial photograph, and you can actually on the lower right-hand quadrant of the photograph,
in the sort of brown patchy area, you can see the creek channel all the way to the left of the mapped floodplain and floodway. And then in the upper quadrant, the northwest quadrant of the photograph, you can see the creek channel is a dark line, a little bit narrower than the floodway that's mapped, which is the dark blue. And you can see that that is completely outside of where the floodway is, which is where the floodway usually will map within the creek channel and adjacent areas. So, and there are a lot of examples of places where this mapping does not line up. We're not quite sure why that is everywhere. Okay, so hopefully we've convinced you why these studies are needed. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the channel migration zone map. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So the channel migration zone map is going to cover 13 miles of the main stem of Issaquah Creek from Lake Sammamish to its confluence of Carey and Holder Creeks. So it's just a narrow area where we look at the creek bed itself and then the areas that it more reasonably occupy or has occupied in about the last 100 years or in the aerial photograph record that we have.
Nancy, just a quick question. So you said how far it's going. Is that just north of Highway 18? Is that where you're talking? Is that what I see on this picture?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to reference it.
Yes, and that's, the confluence area is, so that's directed by state law. It's the size of creeks and streams that are required to have channel migration zones.
I just wanted to make sure I knew how far this was in real life.
Gotcha. So about 13 miles total, including about 6 miles within the city. These study and maps, so the outcomes, the planned outcomes are that the studies and maps will help make residents safer and help them make decisions by showing them where this expected channel migration is going to occur, and also help identify areas where public infrastructure may need to be protected. When adopted by the King County Public Rule, so there's a full process for that, the new mapping will support review of land use proposals by King County in unincorporated areas. And then we're going to hand that information over to the city of Issaquah to do what you will with it, to manage it as you see fit. And that is something that we worked with Gary Shimmick early on to talk about. Did the city want us to do the mapping within the city limits? It is your option to do it yourself, but since we were doing the whole creek upstream, we engaged early on with the city and they agreed that was what they would like to do. So just a real quick, the timeline is the technical work began in 2022. I've been doing field work and collecting historical data. I got the field work about half done, and that's basically accessing the creek from public property, because where the creek is owned by private people, private parties, we need permission to access the actual creek bed and creek banks to do the data collection and field work that we need to do for this analysis. So that progress is about halfway done. And we expect to finish hopefully by the end of 2024, roughly, or right end of 2023, roughly we'll have most of the analysis done and be able to produce a report in early 2024. So then the next slide is just a map of where all the parks are, zooming in now to the city of Issaquah, where your parks are. And I put this map in here to show how creekside parks are really helpful to our efforts. And they help us complete our mapping because they provide access to the creek. I just have to call or email Jennifer Fink, and she's happy to hear, what we're doing and gives me the okay to work on certain days. So that's really, really helpful to be able to access the creek. But more importantly, they provide the open space and natural areas where the creek floodplain can function and the river processes, the creek processes. And they provide, healthy habitat for aquatic species, including salmon. They're public amenities, of course, and they provide permanent flood risk reduction benefits because they prevent residential and commercial development
in these flood hazard areas that are right adjacent to the creek. So that is the channel migration zone mapping. Tracy, hopefully the connection's a little better and they can hear
Yeah,
you.
I switched to my headset. Are you able to hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, maybe my mic on my laptop wasn't picking me up so well. Next, if you would switch to the next slide, I know it's hard for some of you to see this, but this is similar to the map that we showed earlier. So this shows the extents of the flood study or the flood map update that we're going to be doing. It's going to encompass all of Issaquah Creek from Lake Sammamish to where it starts at the confluence of Holder and Carey Creeks, and then small reaches of Holder and Carey Creeks to State Route 18. There'll be a small portion of the North Fork of Issaquah Creek that's part of the study, portion of the East Fork from roughly the Preston area into the city where it joins the main stem, McDonald Creek, and what is known or what's named tributary 0217, which is a creek that flows in from the Four Lakes area. And so what are we looking for outcomes from this flood study or the flood map update, excuse me. The biggest, the number one outcome is accurate updated flood maps, right? We want these maps to truly reflect where flooding is expected to occur. So as we were trying to show on that other picture, there's numerous areas that have changed over 20 years, whether it's channel migration, development, or just accuracy of the data that was used at the time, topography and things, where we can improve on our mapping. And so the updated maps will help residents make decisions that keep themselves, their families, and properties safe, right? So reducing flood risk is one of our primary goals. Second, the maps will update and replace the FEMA flood insurance rate maps for areas within the floodplain. And so, as such, the flood study is going to be prepared to FEMA requirements. When the study is complete, it will be submitted to FEMA for their review, at which point, after the review is complete and we've addressed any comments they have, FEMA will adopt the new mapping and revise the flood insurance rate maps. And then third, the maps will be used by local governments, King County, City of Issaquah, for land use regulation, and as we mentioned earlier, to provide data on hazard areas to support the future flood risk reduction projects that might be identified in that capital investment strategy. We're working closely with the City of Issaquah. As I mentioned, the study is going to provide foundational information for capital planning efforts by the city and by King County moving forward. Timeline of the study. So similar to the channel migration study, the technical work began this past year, early fall. We expect the updated mapping to be ready to submit to FEMA in 2024. And that long time frame reflects both the ongoing technical work that's required to generate the mapping, and then also the time frame of community review, community comment that's part of the FEMA process before the maps are actually submitted for FEMA review. And where's the study at right now? What's going on? Our consultant and surveyors have been out doing field reconnaissance in the basin. They've started survey of bridges and other road crossings, culverts and such to capture data for the setting up the hydraulic model. They've been reviewing existing topographic and aerial imagery and doing a review of the hydrology. So what I mentioned in that previous slide was that we have, 20 more years of data since the last mapping, or this mapping was originally done. So they're looking at rainfall data, change in land use types and other factors, and the creek flow record to see if any changes to the hydrology are warranted. And then they're just starting to develop the computer model that'll be used to model the flows in the river and the resulting flooding. And so that model will incorporate this cross-section and bridge surveys that are going on right now, culvert information, aerial topography information, and any other relevant features on the landscape that are critical to that mapping. That's it for this slide. Back to you, Judy.
Okay, so as with the flood plan, we are doing outreach, lots of it. Our early outreach, which is to initiate the initiation of these studies, began, well, we're beginning with our planning, but we're engaged in it right now. We're very close to sending out a postcard to residents who are in the study areas in the big green area. We've decided to send one postcard so they don't get two postcards for two different studies that are really similar. So we're sending one postcard. And on those postcards will be QR codes and URLs for the online engagement hub, which is like a website, but it's actually a two-way street where we can take in information from folks. And on the last slide, there is those QR codes and URLs are included. We're doing presentations like this one, and we'd be happy to do additional presentations if you think people are interested in just learning about the study in general. We're coordinating with city staff, and then we are going to be reaching out to specific creekside landowners, as I said, for rights of entry to do work on, to just walk on their property, just be no invasive work at all, to collect data for the studies. Then the big outreach comes at the end when we have results. A lot of times it's hard to do early outreach because people want to know, how am I going to be affected? It's like, I don't know until I get the data and get the analysis done. So we expect late 23, 24 is when the public process will begin, and both studies have a formal public process. They both require public meetings and public comment periods. And the CNZ maps go through the SEPA process because it is a new regulation being added. And the FEMA process is also separate, a separate review process. But there should be plenty of time for people to review maps, bring new data if they have it. And so some of this initial outreach is so that we reach the right people at the right times to get information to them about the studies, and also invite early information, because it's easier to change, to incorporate information that people have about flooding before we've made draft maps than changing the maps after they're done. So for example, people have photographs of flooding. We've actually already met with one Creekside resident who had some great photographs from, I think, 2009 that we could see the flood levels on a distinctive feature in his yard that we could tell, how high the water was. And so we could go back and survey that and use that information to calibrate the model that Tracy is doing. And then if we know information about where erosion has happened and how fast it happened, that's helpful for my information to understand the character of channel migration, how quickly does the creek tend to move through different types of materials and comprise its banks. So this outreach with individuals is really helpful, and whatever, I wrote down all the things that you were offering to Chris about groups to reach out to, and so if you have any more specific groups, the HOA recommendation is a good one. You might get any names and numbers of HOAs that anybody might have, and then the email list that you have, that sounds great too.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I had a video, really cool video of some Chinook salmon swimming upstream that I saw in Squaw Valley Park last fall. So they got upstream of the hatchery and they're up there doing their natural thing. Hopefully they'll bring some more Chinook salmon And I wanted to thank everyone from park and environmental boards that this is such a great opportunity to get to know you a little bit and to get your input onto our studies. So the last slide has, as I said, it has our emails, our URLs, and another thank you. So we can take questions, any questions you have now.
Thank you, Judy. We'll start with Danielle and then move over to Chris.
It's not a question, but just a couple more ideas for outreach. For you guys, next door is pretty popular in Issaquah, and so that might be a good place to try to get the survey link, especially to the neighborhoods that are along the creek. Issaquah, as far as like the schools, or if they all send newsletters out, and it would be Issaquah Valley, Issaquah Middle School, and Issaquah High School are the schools that are the feeders for those neighborhoods. And then we have a new equity board in Issaquah. I don't know if you've reached out to them, but they have ideas about how to reach out to communities that are not otherwise, typically represented. And then also the parks, for our last few park projects, we've started to put up like information where it has a QR code where someone who's walking near that park or through the park can, pull up a survey and give input right then. And that might be a great idea, like especially around Confluence Park or some of the parks that that neighbors walk to. So anyway, those are just some other
Great, thank you.
ideas.
Yeah, so our engagement hubs for both the flood study and the CMC study are translated into Spanish and Chinese.
And the flood plan, we have, I think, 9 languages that it's translated into.
So to get a little better access, hopefully, to some of the people's first language isn't English. And then, the next door isn't that's a Facebook page.
It's not a Facebook page, but it's similar. It's a
Yeah.
social media that neighbors use, and I don't know if the city can post to that, I think, but
They can.
individuals can, so.
There's a way to get them.
There's a way to get on it, but I think that's really helpful, like, a lot of people will, see that.
Stacey, did you have something before Chris goes, or?
It was a comment from Brad.
Oh, okay, we'll go to Chris first then.
Friends of Lake Sammamish State Park, if you haven't already reached out to them, and they have a big email list. And then I apologize if you said this and I missed it. Where will you, or how will you display or present the mapping information? Will it be like added to IMAP, or is it going to be a different?
Yeah, eventually both will be on IMAP.
Okay, and then will the FEMA mapping, their online mapping, will that get updated with your maps, or?
Tracy, you want to talk about the FEMA process?
Yeah, sure. So, the FEMA or the floodplain mapping will be put up on IMAP. So the way we usually do that, or the way we typically do that, is once the draft maps have gone through the public meeting and comment period, and we've addressed all those comments, and we submit the maps to FEMA. At that point, we put them up on IMAP, and we use those as a regulatory layer that we used, and that way, because the FEMA process can take some time before they're officially adopted, once that info has been submitted to them, we use it as what we call the best available, right? And so at the time, that'll be on IMAP, and I think as far as presenting the maps, so there'll be a public meeting when the draft maps are ready, and that will be probably held virtually, because we've had actually much better turnout in that sense. We'll see. We may do a hybrid format, and the maps will also be physically available at the Issaquah Library for people to come in and see. And there's basically I think it's a 30-day comment period that starts post-public meeting, which time anybody can make comment or ask questions. We'll take in all those comments, address any that may require changes to the maps, and then they get submitted. So they'll be presented both physically at the Issaquah Library in their draft form, in the public meeting, and then once submitted to FEMA, they'll be available in IMAP, and at that time they can be provided to the city as well to use as best available. So.
Yeah, and then before it's, I've noticed before it's adopted by FEMA, it shows up on IMAP as the regulatory floodplain. So it can be used for regulation, the new mapping, the best available, as you said. And the public meetings also, even though they're hybrid or virtual, they can be recorded. So that's really handy because then we had really great feedback from a process we did summer 2021 when very interested folks just couldn't make the meeting time that we had, even though it was virtual. So it was recorded, so they could watch it later. So we're really trying to increase access that way. And those recordings end up on these engagement hubs that we've already set up.
Great, and I think, did Laura have a question? I saw a question in chat.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, I had a question about, I'm not sure how sea level rise is planned for at the Ballard Locks, but I was wondering if you're expecting groundwater to be expected at all. I know like along the coastlines, there's concerns about groundwater being an issue, and that was a question for you. And then also just a comment for the slide that you have with Issaquah Creek. I think showing those tributaries is helpful because just conceptually, it's hard to, it's not a flat area. So those, like when the water comes along, they just get more affected than like a traditional flat area by a floodplain. You can't get down your hill if there's, your floodplains are all an issue.
So I guess the question of groundwater, that comes into the hydrology aspect of the modeling. So when you're looking at how much runoff is going to be generated by this 100-year rain event in the case of a flood, or what is the 100-year rain event, or what is the 100-year flood event? What is that flow in the river? So the inputs to that groundwater is generally taken into account in that. I don't know, sea level rise and that. I don't think that, given the controls, the locks and all this, the distance up to the mouth of Issaquah Creek, I don't think that'll be factored in. We are anticipating, it's not part of looking at some climate change adjusted flows to see, what kind of higher flows and resulting flooding might be expected in the future. That's not an official part of the FEMA process, but that's something that we're going to do for ours and your knowledge, and just to help kind of see what might be the expectations in the future.
Well, thank you. That's clear.
I'm going to add one thing about groundwater that I thought of when Chris was talking about flooding benefits. Groundwater recharge is a benefit of flooding. If the groundwater can get out onto the floodplains and soak in rather than discharging directly to Lake Sammamish, then it recharges the local groundwater table, and then that water becomes more readily available back to the creek in summer at low flow time when it gets hot, and it's nice cold groundwater, and it's really a beneficial feature for aquatic habitat.
All right, I think Nancy, you're next.
So I have two questions. First one's probably pretty easy. So if we're interested in seeing when like the floodplain maps and stuff come out, is there a way we can get on an email or a distribution list? Is it those QR codes? Is that what we have to scan in to say we want it, we're interested in to hear more? Yeah, the QR codes are the URLs, publicinput.com. And right, exactly, we have an email list we're trying to generate there. Okay, I figured it was easy. The second question I had is more, you guys are collecting a lot of data along Issaquah Creek. And I think it will be highly valuable to the city along the way. The question I have for you is, one of the areas we were looking at that when we were doing a land use code update recently were bog areas and areas with different kinds of soils. Are you picking any of that kind of information up when you're out in the field? I mean, you're not specifically being asked to do that, but the question I have is, when we asked staff, they said, well, we really don't have a lot of information on this. And the question I have, is there any way you're seeing any of that? Because you're a geologist. And I know, a lot of it would be in that area. I would assume a lot of it would be in the creek areas.
Yeah, good question. So I definitely look at the bank materials and the bed materials right local in the creek. And then looking farther out on the floodplain, I look at the geologic materials that are mapped. And the geologic history in this Issaquah basin is really interesting. The glaciers came in and they blocked it. And at one point, I don't know if you know this, but Issaquah Creek used to flow out to the south to the Cedar River through two or three channels, one down May Valley, one down out Hobart. They're really clear in the LiDAR if you go to, or even topography if you look online at IMAP. So, so the glacial history, having had glaciers sitting kind of in the bottom, the creek valley bottom, and it made quite a wide creek, valley over particularly the upper part of the creek. There's a pinch point right before Squawk Mountain, upstream of the city, about River Mile, we call it River Mile 7. And I think you all probably know where it is. It's where Squawk Mountain comes down, it's just before the landing pad. And it pinches right down, there's bedrock right there, and there's bedrock right on so it's just this really interesting kind of hourglass shape to the floodplain. So there's definitely some interesting materials underground that, we're gonna look for information that's readily available, but we aren't gonna be able to do much digging. But I certainly have seen some, what we call lower permeability sediments that are compacted by the glaciers that do make bogs. They hold water, they're slow to drain. But they're also tend to be slow to erode. So if the creek is trying to erode laterally up against some of this material, this siltier, clayier material, it goes more slowly. So I am definitely looking at that type of material.
Are you noting it anywhere so that if somebody was looking for it, they could find it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard at the scale of mapping to show it well on a map, but I'm going to be producing a report that'll have reach by reach descriptions, and I will note it in there. So it might be buried in some detail, but if someone's interested, I'd be always happy to talk geology.
Okay, great, thank you.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just a quick comment. I think it's awesome that the city has taken up the county on the CMZ, the Channel Migration Zone studies within incorporated Issaquah. That's great. I think the next step is making sure that that's being incorporated in some of the considerations around, both current and existing infrastructure. I mean, I could see this being something that would be great to present to the transportation board when that's available. And then in terms of new, bridge crossings or crossings on Zero Creek, Dave, I know we've talked about, David, a little bit about, the trail plan in the state park that you're talking about. And there's, I think Judy and Tracy know that the Greenway Trust has been working with Natural Waters and NHC on a channel migration zone in Lake Sammamish State Parks that exists. But, I know Parks also has plans on, more trail connections, across the creek and along the creek. So I think this is just really, really valuable data, and I'm sure it'll be used. I think it would be great to be as transparent as we can with the board, with the community. And exciting it could be there, to your point, it's just a lot of data, but we gotta make sure we're using it to the best of our ability. So that's just a comment.
All right, I think that may be all of our questions. And is that the final leg of your portion of the presentation, county's presentation?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you all joining us. Sounds like there's plenty of ways to follow up with additional questions and comments. Anything else to leave us with, or?
Really appreciate all the feedback tonight on groups to reach out to. That's great. We've been scrambling, writing madly, and thank you for having us. Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I will add that those engagement hubs are really going to be a good place to kind of, I mean, you'll be a little more, I think, in the know, being heavily involved in just
the city and what's happening, what's going on. But the engagement hubs will be a great place to kind of track the status of the project, at least the flood study and flood map update and channel migration study as they move along. We'll have a timeline on there that indicates which stages of the project are complete, and opportunities in there for residents or anyone to add feedback, upload flood pictures that they have, things like that. So that they're meant to be engagement hubs. They're meant to be an interactive forum for folks to kind of engage with the study. So thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think with that, we will move for our next agenda item, which is the Parks programs update.
You guys want to leave?
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I will sign off then. Thanks.
We understand.
If there are any of those extra handouts that you don't want, I'll take them.
Yeah, I'll walk you out. Okay.
Great. Is that my cue, Jamie?
Yes, go ahead.
Cool. Happy to provide some updates. Jeff Watling again, Parks and Community Services Director. 2023 is certainly represents another really busy year for us as a department, both operationally and capital project wise. Thank you. I know you've got some of your points of interest to Stacy. She was able to provide to me some specific program updates you were wanting. I'll cover those first. And then if we have time, we should have time, I'll touch base on Sammamish Cove and the public comment and information I certainly know in that regard. First, our urban forestry program. You, I think, all know by now, we through the council budget process for the 23-24 budget, we're got full support from council on getting a new position within our park operations team, an urban forestry supervisor. We had a very robust recruitment process, a lot of interest, not surprising, a lot of really strong candidates to select from. Really happy to announce we have our urban forest supervisor that will be starting next week. It's Dan Hintz.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Wow.
So, yeah, we're absolutely thrilled. Dan just brings such a wealth of both education and experience, but then also very tangible local knowledge and experience, and just absolutely thrilled where this position will sort of fit within our organization. As we've been expanding our resources and really knowledge base within our park operations team, we're in many ways sort of creating a natural resources group within that team. The urban forest supervisor, Dan, will sort of oversee that group. We'll work in concert with our park operations supervisor. You're very, I think, all familiar with Matt Meckler. So Matt and Dan form a great supervisory team. Rick Still, our park ops manager, will oversee those two staff. Our volunteer coordinator, I'll give you an update on that. And so the Green Issaquah initiative and a lot of our natural resource work will fall under the urban forest supervisor. A lot of great sort of synergy with that group as well. Our park ranger position, Alex Anderson, will also be supervised by Dan and part of that team. So really just excited to add Dan and that wealth of knowledge, quite frankly, to the group in terms of work plan for that position. So big congrats to Dan. Now here we go, roll up our sleeves, wind it up. There's some real interest in this community, as you all know. And Dan certainly knows himself, and he still said yes. So we're excited. But we do have some funding this year in the budget for an urban forest management plan. The city's first sort of holistic look at our urban forest, and Dan will be leading that effort. So there'll be a lot of community engagement around that, a lot of work with both the park board and the environmental board on that work. We're also, and the park board's aware of this, going to be looking at a much needed review and likely updating of our heritage tree program. That program has hasn't really been looked at in a long, long time. So that too will be an effort that Dan will be leading. From the park board side of things, as we've looked at our work plan, we've already identified an ad hoc group within the park board that will be focusing on urban forestry and working with Dan on those specific efforts. As we sort of looked at the park board work plan and how do we sort of maximize and diversify interest and feedback and interaction with the board on so many projects that we've got going on. So that's urban forestry. Dan, anything you want to sort of add?
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm really excited for this transition. I've been able to tell a couple people about this in the last few days, but I'll be wrapping up my time with the Mountain Sun Greenway tomorrow. Actually, will be my last day there. After 7 years, it'll be starting in the city probably on Monday. So did talk to Stacy. This does mean that I will be stepping down from the environmental board. So this will be my last meeting, but I'm really excited to, still obviously interact with you all moving forward in this new capacity park board. I haven't met all of you much before, but really excited to be plugging into this role too and get to know you all better as well. So that's actually kind of news to me. There's be a kind of subcommittee there. So that's great too to hear that that's coming together. And like I said, yeah, really, really passionate about this community, our canopy, our forest here, and how that ties to all the stuff we've been talking about here and working on the last couple of years. So it's been great working with you all, but I won't be a stranger after this, obviously. So
I just want to say it's going to be great having someone from the environmental board on your staff so that they can kind of clue you into what we're interested in.
my ears will still be wide open.
If I could add to that point, Dan, but honestly, it's not necessarily the potential of a conflict of interest, because as Dan and I talked, there really isn't a conflict of interest in terms of staying. I think it's more just the broader principle of should staff be on boards and commissions in general. And so obviously these relationships are key, and again, it's not you don't see it as any type of conflict of interest. Quite frankly, it's very complementary in terms of what our goals are as well. So that's urban forestry. Green Issaquah, I mentioned that just briefly. We too have a volunteer coordinator position that was approved in the budget. Again, very successful recruitment process. Just finished second interviews earlier this week with Rick, and we should be having an offer, if it's not out already, should be out super soon. So we hope to be announcing a volunteer coordinator and bringing that position on board. That position was really necessitated by a number of things. We partnered with Forterra. Janet knows so well. I think in my first year in 2016, talking to Janet about we're going to get Forterra, we're going to get a Green Issaquah program going. Forterra's, I think for a number of reasons, have sort of backed away from some of its Green Cities program and its capacity to supporting. So the timing was right for us as a city. There's such value in the principles of Green Issaquah, of creating volunteer stewards, of doing that work. So internalizing this coordinator and that ability for us to really continue on in that work. And really that's focused work, right? That's so complementary to this bigger urban forestry goal. But Green Issaquah is really, how are we looking at our city-owned lands, our city-owned public forest, urban forest, and making sure we're leading by example. We're doing all we can to promote and foster a healthy forest with the public lands that we own. So again, really complimentary to have that work falling within Dan's supervision. So much more ahead there. I think another program you were interested in was the Park Strategic Plan update. In 2018, the city adopted its most recent Park Strategic Plan. This is my tattered copy. Obviously, it hasn't gathered dust on the shelf. It's pretty tattered and well used, but 2024, every 6 years, RCO, the state granting agency, asks and requires that cities update their park strategic plans. So by March, April of next year, we need to have one adopted. So we are going to begin that community engagement effort in earnest this year. That too, as Park Board knows, is an ad hoc group opportunity that has been sort of identified to help with some of that focused shepherding group. We rely on some consultant support to help in that effort as well. We put out a request for proposal right at the beginning of the year as the budget was adopted, went through a review process and interview process, including a community member, Mr. Kapler. I know wasn't able to join us on the day, but thank you just reviewing those proposals, Dave, and providing your feedback. Happy to say we have a really good partner that we're finalizing a contract with, and it's a Berger Partnership. If you're familiar, a local landscape architect firm. I've had the privilege of working with them in multiple cities, but really, really good local team of landscape architects that understand Western Washington, understand Issaquah. They've done some Issaquah projects. They're partnering with a broader group called Design Workshop. Design Workshop has done really good park system plans, strategic park system, trail system plans for a number of cities throughout really the western region of the United States, including Boulder, Colorado, Salt Lake City, Vancouver, British Columbia, obviously some much bigger than Issaquah, but certainly seeing they understand the nexus of public spaces and livability, public spaces and quality of life, public spaces and the natural habitat. So as we finalize that contract and really begin to map out and timeline out that work this year, both the engagement side and drafting the plan wise, we'll make sure we'll be interested to know what touch points with the environmental board you'd be interested in that process. So excited that work will be getting underway. I think those are one I know there was interest in some of the prior opportunities I've had to interact with all of you about electrification. And how are we looking at our park operations team and the array of gas-powered equipment that we use throughout just maintaining and stewarding our system. Really happy to say, proud to say that the park ops team has been really hard at work, and that both a combination of work we did last fall and then another sort of tranche of acquisitions we did early this year. We're well on our way to fully electrifying all of our handheld equipment. So all of our blowers, our mowers, our trimmers, our handheld mowers, I should say. A lot of that equipment that we use on a daily basis throughout the city is going to be electrified. We're going to be probably about 80% electrified equipment as we roll out this spring and summer. So really, really proud of the team for making such a quick jump on that. We're already working with the fleet division, some of our bigger equipment, i.e. trucks, our riding mowers. The commercial industry is not quite as advanced in some of those, but we are ready when I think equipment gets to that point. Those larger equipment that we're really excited to look at electrifying that as well. So some great work by the team in that regard. A couple of updates, just some general projects you might have seen. We've got a pretty big capital investment project going on in Old Town. The Pedestrian Park Senior Center project is what we're calling it, in a broader sense before the pandemic. As a result of the Park Strategic Plan, one of the goals was let's take a look at the compilation of parks that make up Old Town or that are within Old Town: Memorial, Veterans Memorial Park, Depot Park, Pedestrian Park. I might not be getting all the names. It's sort of a disjointed sense of public spaces. There was a lot of public outreach we did just before the pandemic to say, as a community, how might you want to re-envision that? How could those public spaces better support Old Town, better support Front Street, better support the residential areas around that, connection with the Rainier Trail, et cetera. Through the budget process last year, council identified a pretty good chunk of the federal American Recovery Act funding, the ARPA funding. So we have been hard at work on a couple of concepts that we have out for a survey right now. If any of you have been downtown, you maybe have seen the QR code boards inviting residents to lend comment to those projects. We have 2 concepts that we're seeking feedback on. If you haven't taken the survey, please do. It closes March 19th. I think we're up to 500 survey responses now, so a lot of interest from the community, a lot of fun, engaging responses in terms of how those public spaces might better relate to one another and better relate to the private properties and private uses around them. Any questions on any of those items? We'll keep going. Okay. Whew. So I'll breathe. Sammamish Cove, as Connie certainly mentioned in her public comment, Sammamish Cove Park, if you're not familiar, is the park space that's sort of wedged between I-90 to its south and Lake Sammamish State Park to its north. If you were on I-90, it was directly across from the new REI headquarters. That park has been under a lot of some historic pressure, but more recently some pressure of different interests. I'm going to sort of give a quick origin story though. In 1998, that property was purchased by King County. When the county purchased that property, they utilized, among, I think, a number of funding sources, 2 grants, 2 grant sources that most grants, just like the grants that when we purchase public property, have covenants and deed restrictions tied to them. Fast forward to 2007, during the annexation of that South Sammamish Cove area, that park, that King County Park was transferred to the city of Issaquah in 2007. As part of that transfer, and I've been familiar, or in my career, been part of a number of transfers with the county, there's an interlocal agreement between the county and the city that legally makes that transfer. In that interlocal agreement, one of those grants was identified, but not the second grant wasn't necessarily identified. So the city was not aware of the 2 grants. They were just aware of the 1 grant. In 2011, there was a development agreement that the city signed with Rowley for a stormwater facility to be installed. As I came on board in 2016, 2017 was informed of the project. We in Parks wanted to make sure that King County was aware, so the deed restrictions, the county, what we were aware of at the interlocal agreement was the county used some 1989 open space bond funds. So the covenant and the deed restriction that went with that was, hey, as King County invested this money in it, we want to make sure the uses are complementary, and we as the county want to preserve our interests, so we want to be able to be notified and sort of review what is being proposed. So we, within Parks, began that process with the county and notifying them of this development agreement that the city entered into and getting their feedback on that. Then the pandemic came in 2020. The county communicated back to the city that they reviewed that proposed development agreement, that proposed stormwater project, and they agreed that it fell within it was not limiting to the deed restrictions or the goals of the site, the property, since it's an underground facility, and that no conversions would be needed. We became informed, King County, I should say, was informed through some work that the state did in 2022. So last summer, they were reviewing all of their grant files and let the county know, hey, when you transferred this Sammamish Cove Park to the city of Issaquah in 2007, you didn't let them know and you didn't transfer this state grant. So as we've become aware of that, we are going through the same process where we want to make sure, because those funds, they were aquatic land, ALEA, is a federal funds that RCO governs for the state. We want to make sure that those restrictions and those covenants are also abided by and with this, again, 2011 development agreement that the city entered into. So that's a process that will continue. That's sort of a double process in that with that grant, the grant itself still needs to be transferred from the county to the city, if you follow what I say, because that didn't happen in 2007. And then as that is transferred to the city, who's now the owner of that property, we also want to make sure RCO reviews this proposal and gives their feedback on compliance. As was mentioned, those aren't the only, this stormwater project's not the only pressure being put on Sammamish Cove Park. Along with the Northwest Sammamish Road Pinch Point project being adjacent to the park, there's certainly some pending pressures and coordination that needs to be done there. As well, Washington DOT or WashDOT, state DOT, you may have heard there was a lawsuit by the local tribes, not necessarily just on, well, I think it was WashDOT, but WashDOT is required to expand, improve culverts through all of their interstates throughout the state. And so what that means for I-90, there are 5 culverts that WashDOT needs to upgrade, improve, address from a fish passage standpoint. And so as that project begins in earnest, it has come to our attention that WashDOT has keen interests on Sammamish Cove Park and being part of their solution there. So again, as Connie outlined, I would reinforce that there are some historic, as in 2011, but I think some more recent pending pressures that are being put on that park that we are working with both the local developer who has the development agreement, but namely WashDOT as well. Myself and the Public Works Director have been working diligently on making WashDOT aware and having a better understanding of not only public properties that this fish passage projects may be wanting access to and changing the use of, but also right-of-way, city right-of-way that may be impacted, and are working on the best approach and the best method to certainly communicate to city council and also communicate to the community what should and what is going to be anticipated or understood by all of these fish passage projects. So a lot going on. Certainly something we want to remain very transparent with, and yeah, not only to Sammamish Cove Park, as was mentioned tonight, but really a number of areas that those projects are going to interface with city infrastructure and city property. So that's a lot, but there's a few updates. If you have questions, or if there's any other work plan items, Park Board, please chime in as well if I missed anything.
Hey Jeff, that vault that Raleigh wants to build, is that gonna be in the park area, or are they gonna put it on the south side of I-90?
So the vault itself would be on the south side, and then my understanding is the pipe would be just part of the discharge system. Yeah, but no, the vault and the storage is not happening within the park.
Okay.
As I understand it, the goal of that project is to not impact Tibbetts Creek with stormwater.
So Chad,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is that like what, that company that wanted to do that storm project, is that part of the, is it like a private company or, I mean, what is the purpose of that, building that storm project?
Yeah, yes, a private property owner, landowner, developer. A development agreement is an agreement made between private landowners and the city in terms of how they will proceed with their project. So, yeah.
Thank you.
That's it for me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. I think then, that concludes all of our main agenda items. Next, Stacy, did you have some reports?
Just quickly to note for the environmental board that we do have a special meeting on April 3rd. That is going to be to discuss waste reduction and also to make a recommendation on the Read Plus pledge. So we'll be getting that packet out about a week before the meeting. Other thing, I'll just put in another plug. City's hosting its first sustainability fair April 16th. If you have a favorite community gathering place that you go, there's a few posters out on the table. You can grab one, put those up, but please continue to spread the word.
Pickering Barn.
Yeah.
All right, and then any other business or announcements? One, thank you, Dan, for your time on the board. You've been a great resource for the board, and we're sad to see you go, but you couldn't be going to a better place, so. Yeah, we will, we'll miss you, but I know you'll be back, or I'm sure you'll be back at some point, so, not going far. I think otherwise, with that, we are adjourned, so thank you, Parks Board, thank you, Environmental Board, have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow.
Thanks for coming, Jeff.
Oh, you bet.
Good to hear about-
I can-
I wasn't, yeah, I was